This podcast is a Uniting Heart and Soul production. Hello and welcome to Filthy Hope, a podcast from Uniting Heart and Soul in Wallara, all about choosing faith and hope in the midst of the mess and filth of the world. The ministry of Uniting Heart and Soul is one built on a declaration of radical honesty, something that we will try to embody as we have conversations about God, faith, life and religion, but also the grey spaces where those things intersect. This means that you might hear some language that you're not used to hearing from a minister, but we're also going to be talking about some potentially confronting subject matter, frankly and honestly, so we do recommend that you hold off from listening around little ones. I'm your host, Jonty, and this week on the podcast, it's part 2 of our first series, Where the Bleep is God, in which we're going to look at some of life's challenges and ask the tough question, where is God? This week, I'm going to be sharing some of my story about dealing with depression and PTSD. If anything in our discussion triggers or concerns you, please don't hesitate to contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or check out the other mental health resources down below in the show notes. Welcome to Filthy Hope. But before we dive into our main segment, of course, we have to stop by Vent Central. So Ness, you're up. What's grinding your gears this week?
My husband's just, after 2 years, gone back on the road with his gig, with his job, and he's travelling back to the UK for work. And I got thinking about what it's like to go on a plane. And I asked him, I said, what did you ask for, when the breakfast comes around? And he said to me, I asked, of course, for the eggs first, and they didn't have the eggs. And so then I asked for the fruit salad, and they didn't have the fruit salad. And then I said to the hostess, well, what do you have? And she said, frittata. He hates frittata, and he just can't stand it. And I'm thinking to myself, that you paid $5.5K to get to England, and they can't even have enough eggs or fruit salad on the plane to feed them before they land. That just grinds my gears, Jonty. It really does.
How do you feel about plane food in general? Because I've had some awful experiences with it.
I don't mind it. It's a little bit like Jenny Craig Love, and they come in the little thing, and I don't actually mind it, but I can't do a frittata myself either. So I really get Rob on that one.
Yeah, I've had it, and I don't know if it was because I was sick at the time, but I had like a super weirdly positive experience with plane food. It was a domestic flight on Virgin, I think, down to Melbourne. I was 12 or 13, and I think I was sick anyway, but the chicken sandwich that they gave us, I still in my brain remember it as the best chicken sandwich I've ever eaten, and I don't know why. It was probably because I was starving. I think I was on drugs to make myself feel better for the flight, and all of a sudden it was probably just a super average chicken sandwich. But for whatever reason, I just have in my mind that Virgin Airways do amazing chicken sandwiches.
Well, Qantas don't do a very good frittata, according to Rob.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Hold off on the frittata, thanks. Great. So, that takes us through into our main segment. As with last week, we're going to be going into mental health and where the bleep is God amongst mental health. Last week, Rev Ness shared about her experience with anxiety. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen because it's a really, really interesting story, and we got into some really cool stuff there, so I recommend you go back and listen to it. But this week, we're going to be talking about depression. Ness was really good at looking up a few statistics about anxiety and how many people suffer from that. I wasn't nearly as prepared. All I'm going to be doing is sharing a little bit about my story. Before we go, do you remember off the top of your head what those stats were for mental health?
So 1 in 4 people suffer from anxiety.
Yeah.
1 in 3 are women, and 1 in 5 are men. And anxiety is the most common mental health condition in Australia. 45% of people will experience a mental health condition at some point in their lifetime. Scary, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess to just speak a little bit to my experience there, I had a pretty major experience of trauma in a workplace, which I'll get to in a sec, which I guess in retrospect and through therapy was pointed to as, it seems obvious in retrospect, but that was sort of where acute depression started. But I guess to start, before I dive into that, I've sort of come across this kind of, I guess, misconception that people that suffer from depression, it's sort of, I mean, often it is hereditary, and often it is just a kind of almost like a chronic illness that happens without any external causality. But grew up a Christian, went to a public school, public primary schools and high schools, shifted over to private school when I was in late high school, grew up a Christian, was in a pretty normal environment. And I think in that environment as a Christian in sort of secular spaces, a pretty common thing and something that I experienced was not necessarily depression. I think my overdramatic 14-year-old brain that had just discovered metal probably went, oh, everything sucks and I'm depressed. I was probably just a little bit overdramatic, but overall was pretty healthy. Played lots of sport, was fit, didn't ever really feel like for an extended period of time ever really suffered from any mental illness, which is all to say that, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't, often you hear about people that are born with depression or have suffered with depression their whole life. My experience was much more external events that intersected with my life caused my depression. So I want to make that distinction because when I've talked to people about this in the past, there's almost this assumption that, well, because you've had depression, that's something that you've struggled with your whole life. That is often the case with some people, whether it's dormant or it's a recurring thing. Mine was very much, I was pretty mentally fit and healthy, and then I had an experience that sort of changed that for me. And so to go into my experience a little bit, I obviously work at the church now, Uniting Heart and Soul, but my first real job outside of high school and uni was working at a church as the children's, youth and families worker in a 20-hour-a-week job. This was also in my home church, which for people that may not grow up in church environments, this means that I was working in a ministry team at a church, the congregation of which made up of people like my parents' age, people older than my parents, people that are my friends, all of which have known me since I was, a kid, younger. There's footage of, I think we had like a 25-year anniversary for the current building a while back, and there was all this footage of me and my mates crawling around at birthday parties aged 18 months.
Wow. With
parents who are now still at church in that congregation. So that's a bit of context that'll become important in a sec. And essentially what happened was there was a pretty traumatic event that I then had to deal with professionally. And that's why I say beforehand that it was my first job, because that's important. I was less than 6 months into my first job, little to zero training, and had to suddenly deal with an event that, without going into details, put myself, my friends, my peers, but also children and teenagers under my care at risk, and suddenly had to deal with it professionally. That in itself was pretty traumatic, but then on top of that, had to deal with it in a personal sense with my peers and work through with my friends what that meant. To make it more complex, the person that had to be dealt with was one of those friends.
Oh my gosh.
And so you can sort of start to imagine the way that sort of just made everything super messy in terms of friendships, professional responsibilities. Throw on top of that confidentiality. So what that meant was I was in a position where I had to pretty directly confront a close friend and mentor for some pretty awful shit that they'd been doing. I had to professionally look after volunteers that were in my team that were under my supervision and care.
How old were you, Jonty?
I was, when was this? I was 20,
Wow.
not quite 21. So I had to deal with that professionally and personally, but also this person was a mentor for a long time. I'm trying not to go into too much detail because I don't want to. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but
Somebody you looked up to.
yeah, someone I looked up to, someone
model.
who meant a lot to me as a teenager. Sort of
Yeah.
discovering, when as a young Christian, you sort of get to a point where you kind of go, you throw your parents' faith out and start to figure out what it actually means for you. And this person was really foundational for me in discovering that as a teenager, because they were a leader of mine while I was in youth group. But then the confidentiality of, keeping this event not secret, but stopping the effects of it spreading throughout the congregation, which then meant that my support networks all of a sudden weren't available to me indefinitely until the event sorted itself out. And I'm being very careful in not treading into details of what happened, because I just don't think it's necessary. Suffice to say, that was really hard for me. But the point of which is not the event itself. The point of which is I then pretty immediately was suddenly experiencing I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have any excitement to do anything. I'm a musician and a writer. All of a sudden, I had no desire to do any of that.
Yep.
I was also having panic attacks for the first time. I was also having experiences which would later, through therapy and professional help, be pointed to as pretty clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
All of which, as I said earlier, was very new to me. I hadn't ever experienced this sort of real mental illness. I think a lot of Christians who suffer from mental illness often can go, this is my experience talking to other Christians, isn't everyone, but some of the experiences that I've had talking to people is their mental illness is something that they can hide when they go to church. When they go out and do the rest of their life, they struggle and they experience whatever it is that they experience, but then on Sunday, you put your jacket on and you button it in, and then you go to church. That was not my experience at all, because church was where that trauma came from. So that was pretty awful, and again, those experiences of those symptoms, I guess, those outward manifestations physically of what depression felt like were very much numbness, no energy, didn't want to get out of bed. And the element that a lot of Christians find very difficult to talk about is the intrusive thoughts, the suicidal thoughts and things like that, which, praise God, I'm here today.
Thank the Lord for that, mate.
But that was a very real experience for me, is suddenly having these intrusive thoughts. So I guess...
Did you want to take your life at any point, Jonty?
No. Short answer, no. Long answer, sort of. Because that's the way intrusive thoughts work, as opposed to planned, premeditated suicidal ideation. Intrusive thoughts were the way I have sort of learned to internalize and wrap my head around it, and was explained very helpfully to me by my therapist. Intrusive thoughts aren't premeditated, calculated thoughts. They're your brain in panic mode.
Yep.
It's that fight or flight thing. So for me, it was I didn't have anywhere to go, and suddenly my brain was going, it would make this a whole lot easier.
Yep.
So for me, it was never, this sucks, I actually want to kill myself. It was, this sucks, I don't want to do, panic attacks, depression, where do I go? And these intrusive thoughts in the back of my head would start to, all of which were met with, get the fuck out of my head, or where's that coming from? Which inevitably led to more panic and feeling awful. But were never that premeditated, calculated, me trying to find a way out. So, and I think that's something else that with suicidal ideation, that difference between it's one thing to have suicidal ideation and premeditated, pre-planned attempts on your own life, but those intrusive thoughts are a lot trickier to talk about, I find personally, because you want to talk to someone about it, but you're scared of that reaction of like, oh my God, Jonty's suicidal. We need to lock him up and look really after him. Yeah. So, and I think, I mean, this was what, 4 or 5 years ago? I can't think off the top of my head. It was a while ago now. And I guess the thing that I would say at the end of it is, as someone who that was very much an external, this caused this thing. Obviously, there were seeds there that were uncovered later on through therapy that also contributed, but it can happen to anyone. I didn't ever think of myself as someone who was depressed, but shit happens.
Yeah.
And it did happen, and I found myself very, very depressed. And that post-traumatic thing as well was throw on top of that as well, worth adding as well. All of which, fun fact, I learned in the space of 3 seconds in one go. Depression, PTSD, and also insomnia, which is something that we could talk about if you like. It's a very tricky place to be where all you want to do is sleep and not interact with the world, but you also can't go to sleep.
That's the one.
Yeah. But like I said, I never thought of myself as someone who was ever in danger of that happening to me, but it did. And the thing that helped was admitting it and going and getting help.
Amen.
Because I think as Christians, and we talked about this last week, often the response, and this isn't, I want to make it clear that, we're not throwing Christians under the bus here.
No.
We love the church and it's our
100%.
family, right? But something that, and we talked about this last week, was that that tendency for people to say, oh, well, maybe you just need to pray more. Your faith might not actually just be up to scratch. You need to go back and work on your faith, and that might help. Trust me, that doesn't, like, obviously faith and God is huge as part of getting you through that. But when it is actually an illness, and like we talked about last week, I'm not going to say to someone with a broken arm, oh, just get rid of the cast, you don't need it, just go to God. In the same way with mental illness, there's only so much I could do before I actually went and got professional help, which seems to be a rare thing that Christians will talk about. Correct me if I'm wrong, hit us up on Instagram and blast me for saying, oh, all Christians suck at dealing with mental health. I know that there are lots of people, I mean, my own support group were fantastic, and a lot of them are Christians as well. But yeah, the takeaway I would say is it could happen. Like, I didn't think it had ever happened to me. It did. And the only thing that, well, not the only thing, but the huge thing that helped me, that was a really, like, the turning point, was going and getting help. Yeah.
Amazing. Were you prescribed meds?
Yes.
And how can you talk about that?
Yeah, totally. Same again. I was like, oh, great. I've been diagnosed with this thing. That's fine. I'll just, knuckle down and deal with it. And all of a sudden, take these pills. I was like, I didn't think I was that crazy. Do I really need to take medication?
It feels like that, doesn't it? You think, oh shit, this is serious now if they've given me drugs.
Yeah, exactly. It's
only the real nut jobs take drugs.
Yeah. It sort of makes it a little bit more real.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I mean, my experience was largely positive. I think I'm no longer on those meds. That was for detail. That was escitalopram, I think is what the drug was called. I could be wrong.
It's got a sexy name.
Yeah, it makes you want to take it.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember the dosage, but that was really, for me, that was because my mood was so consistently low.
Yep.
And all that did was audio files. This is an illustration that will work for you. It kind of acted as a compressor. So my low moods were boosted up, but it also capped my high moods at a certain point. So it sort of just regulated my moods and lifted it, but also stopped it from getting too high, because it sort of works in both directions that way, which was incredibly helpful in allowing me to go back to work, because what it meant was that low mood it wasn't raised to good, but it was raised high enough that I could function and go to work and live my life normally. I will say as well, as soon as I didn't need them, I just cold turkeyed that shit, and I was like,
Wow.
I don't need these, and that sucked for about a week because I was like, I'm sick of taking it. Because the other thing is those physical and mental side effects of taking those meds, which I'm sure you'll yeah.
Share about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that soon, actually. But yeah, the medication's an interesting one because it definitely helped, but at the same time, as soon as I realised I didn't need them anymore, I kicked that.
Yeah,
As
that's
soon as
amazing.
I could.
Good on you.
Yeah.
I heard this little song that I really loved. A friend of mine's on a drug called Lexapro for depression.
Yeah.
And it goes like this. Jesus loves me, this I know, for he gave me Lexapro. I think,
I love that.
Yeah, praise the Lord for the drugs, mate. Bring that shit on.
Yeah.
You know, there's a time and a place.
Oh, if it's necessary.
And it saves our lives.
Absolutely.
It saved your life. It saved my life.
Absolutely.
100%, Jonty. I used to say to my therapist, I'd get there to therapy and I would say, and I was on Avanza at that stage, and she'd say, how are you today, Ness? I'm going, I just really want to be taken up to the Sand Hospital and put on a drip. I just want to be asleep. Can you make me go to sleep, please? Because I don't want to deal with what's going on in my brain right now.
Yeah.
And that idea of shutting it down, making it all stop, make the thinking go away. I just don't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to actually die and not be around. I just wanted to have a break from the brain.
Yeah.
And the shit that was going on upstairs here, right? It's and you can see why people become drug addicts, not the prescribed stuff, but the other stuff, can't you? Just to sort of shut yourself down.
Yeah.
I can really understand that. Or why you turn to booze, just, knock yourself out to escape the monkey in the brain, as they say.
Yeah, booze is an interesting one as well. Because they say when you're on medication, you're not meant to drink. And I said to them, give me one that I can drink on then. I don't want it. Oh, no, you're not meant to drink on any of them. So I was like, okay, fine. I have a funny story about, every teenager's got those drinking stories. I have a funny drinking story about that those meds definitely had a part in that turning out as messy as it did.
Of course.
But I think drinking is a tricky one because I, in retrospect, think that obviously not drinking, I mean, clearly not drinking on medication when you're not meant to drink is, like, that's clearly the thing to do. But I also think that it's tricky in terms of, like, if you're using it as something to cope.
Oh, totally.
Where that's healthy and where it isn't. Is there a line? And
there's definitely a line, isn't
there? Where other people can start to play into that and point out, like, hey, maybe you should...
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Is now a good time for me to ask you then, in your story of depression and PTSD, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sure it's going to be really helpful for heaps of people to listen. I think there's nothing sexier than a man talking about being vulnerable enough to share in such deep stuff, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Sharing.
That's why I'm sharing. I want to be sexy.
You just are, Jonty. I'll take that one to Claire.
Yeah.
Did I offend you when I said that? I didn't mean it.
No, not at all.
I just think it's really wonderful that you're doing that, and I think it's great. So in your story, where the bleep was God?
I mean, that's the question that I was asking myself, because my experience with depression was so deeply linked with spirituality and spiritual abuse and abuse of power within the church. I was, a lot of that, those early days of suddenly going, where the fuck is God?
Yeah.
Like, now would be a brilliant time for you to show up and fix all of this, because I can't deal with this. And like when you flip through the Bible and look at all the places where people ask those questions, the answer that you get often isn't what you feel like you need or want right that time. And it's multifaceted. I think my therapist, I actually had I had a therapist changeover at one point, but the therapist I currently have was really, really foundational in me figuring out some answers to that question, because not even within a Christian therapy company, I don't know, that's whatever you call that, I just happened to have a therapist who was also a Christian, which for me, normally I don't care. Like, you know, I don't go to the doctor and say, "Are you a Christian doctor?"
That's right.
I didn't care. Like, but it turned out that was really helpful for me, because the things that I needed to work through were so deeply linked to spirituality and church and things. So she understood,
Fully got it,
all of that stuff. And where was God in my depression? God was there in that therapy room with my therapist. Because that was the first time, like I said, with the confidentiality stuff and being able to deal with that event, that trauma in a professional sense, I wasn't able to work through those things with my support network because I wasn't able to at that time. And so being able to actually express those things not only helped me obviously work through those things specifically in that moment, but also helped me to work through some things that I probably, in retrospect, didn't feel like I was safe enough to do in a church setting anyway. Like, I go to church every week, I go to youth group, I lead during the week, I do blah, 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 but all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I haven't actually talked about any of this stuff with, I mean, friends aside, that everyone's got those close mates that you talk about anything with, but other than that, in a church setting, I haven't felt like I'm able to talk about these things. And all of a sudden I'm talking to another Christian about it, and we aren't just talking about it in a purely clinical sense, we're actually talking about it through the lens of our faith. Yep. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Why have we not done this before? It just opened up this sense of honesty and transparency that often you go and meet other Christians from other churches and it's weird anyway, because you suddenly, you're meeting new people, but you're also trying to navigate different doctrines and traditions and stuff. You're not going to get into any of that stuff, but all of a sudden I'm having a conversation with another Christian who's essentially a stranger, and just ripped that Band-Aid off and just got into it. And now I'm just like, talk about it.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if you're obviously it does matter if you're uncomfortable. You want to look after the safety of others. But like, uncomfortable in the sense of, oh, should we be talking about it? Fuck that. Just talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it makes it so much easier. And I think, where is God? I sometimes thought, or maybe God, and this might be part of some sort of insecurity or lack of faith at the time, but I was like, if I ask these really tough questions, is God just going to vanish into a plume of dust and reveal, oh, it was all
hocus
pocus.
All
a ruse.
Yeah.
And I've just, through asking these tough questions, I've completely crumbled the entire tower of cards. Yeah, but it was the opposite. It was entirely the opposite. And so I think God was present in those really, really tough questions. And that's been my experience since, is encouraging others in a really safe and encouraging environment and manner to ask those really tough questions, because it's actually it's the opposite. God isn't going to get offended or vanish or whatever. No, God's going to show up and be present
100%.
and walk through those things with you. Yeah.
Rock right up. Like, I mean, I think about, I don't want to get all Jesus-y on you, but I think about Easter time and when the boys were in the upper room, and the boys are all wondering, they've done the Saturday deal, and Jesus, then the tomb gets rolled, the tomb is opened up and the girls find Jesus' body gone, and then the boys are all shitting themselves, clearly, and everybody's gathered in the upper room hiding because they don't want to get busted and arrested, and who just floats through the wall? Talk about needing confirmation, right?
Yeah.
At their deepest, darkest hour.
Yeah.
He just rocked up, mate, just through the wall. And it's like, that reminds me of what you just said. He just rocked up for you right when you were asking those big questions.
Yeah. And that's not to say that everything's like fixed overnight because God rolled up. That's not what I want to say. What I want to actually say is like I didn't expect, like I said, I didn't expect any of this to happen to me. I didn't think it ever would, because I was fit and healthy and on top of things. Shit happens.
Yep.
And shit will continue to happen. Even, point to me in the Bible where it says, follow Jesus and then your life will be brilliant. Like, just doesn't say it. It actually says the opposite.
Yeah.
But it's actually an experience of, and that's, we're recording this just before Easter. That's the whole story of the Passion, is that Jesus isn't some, ghost that lives up in the sky that doesn't understand what it's like to live on earth in all the suffering. Like, no.
He suffered.
He knows what it's like, mate. Like he
gets suffering, all right.
He's there with us, and he understands it, and has a lot to say to you in those moments of like how to deal with it, and how to not how to put the blinkers on, but how to just not shut up shop
and be in it.
Yeah,
just be in it. You'll cruise. You'll get through it.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is we forget to reach out.
Yes.
I know some of my biggest panic attack moments. I as a minister, I still forget to pray straight away, Jonty. It's almost like I need a Post-it note on my palm of my hand so I can go, pray now. You're losing your shit. Pray now.
Yeah.
I can do it for anybody else in anybody else's situation, but when it comes to myself, I often just forget to reach out to the Lord right there in that moment.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Have you ever had a panic attack during church or before church?
Yes, I'm sure you've seen me. Last Easter I had a massive one. Absolutely, it was on Good Friday. I absolutely nearly lost my shit on Good Friday. And I was a tremulous, sick, panicked mess. And panic attack doesn't last very long. It feels like it's a lifetime in your brain, but it's a short period of time. Can't remember what the time frame is. Under 3 minutes, isn't it, that it lasts for?
I couldn't tell you.
It's
Definitely
just
feels
awful.
Like
feels like forever.
Yeah.
And I then have to look like I'm got it together because I'm leading this church. And I'd just prior to delivering the message had a massive panic attack. So I've had it happen a lot actually. Yeah, it's not a cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, having panic attacks for the first time through that episode was, I was meant to be leading worship, and all of a sudden I'm in the vestry and it's 6:32 p.m. Service is meant to have started 2 minutes ago, and I just had to leave.
Yeah,
I left.
Run.
I was like, no, not. See you later. Bye.
Wow.
And just left. Which, if you'd said that to me, I've been leading worship. I think I was 14 or something. There's another story. I got asked on the Friday night 2 days before, hey, do you want to lead worship? I was like, no. Great, I'll see you on Sunday. So I've been doing that for years and years and years and years. It's like second nature to me now. But all of a sudden, I was like, I can't get up on stage. I'm not able to do this.
Yeah.
So it's
overwhelming.
Just to reiterate, like, it can happen to anyone.
Anybody.
And it's not something to be like ashamed about or try to be like. I think there's a particularly, I can only speak from my experience as a man, but there's an element of pride that comes along with it, that it's really tough to admit that something's up because there's that perception that it dents your pride.
Yeah.
And I
name it now because I find it helpful. You've watched me name it in church.
Mm-hmm.
I'll often get up to the pulpit and if I'm anxious or nervous or stressed I still get anxious before every delivery of a message because I take it that seriously. I put too much pressure on myself, and I think I just say it. You've heard me say it to the congregation. I'm really anxious right now, guys, and then I might pray, or I might just say something funny, which helps me self-regulate, and then I'm good to start again.
Yeah, and then you crush it anyway.
Then I try to crush it. I try to not say anything rude in the pulpit.
Yeah, I never said anything too bad. That's what the podcast's here for.
Amen. Hey, thanks for sharing today.
Yeah, of course.
It's amazing.
Anytime. Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have Julie Ryan, our psychologist, come and share on anxiety and depression and mental illness and talk about attachment theory next time we meet. So that's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun to have her.
I'm really looking forward to chatting to her. That'll be really good.
Yeah, it'll be a good one, hey?
Yeah. Well, that brings us into our ending segment of gratitude, which, if you're new to the podcast, gratitude is a word that we've come up with, a cross between gratitude and grit. So what's something that's bringing you, that you have gratitude for this week amongst the grit of life?
So, Jonty, 7 years ago, I started on my Avanza medication, and then I had a healing in December, I went on this retreat and I had a solitude retreat. Silence and solitude. Can you imagine me being silent for a period of days with a whole lot of female ministers? It was like my biggest nightmare, quite frankly. And I had a massive panic attack, and then I had this incredible healing. All these beautiful female ministers from across all the denominations in Sydney laid their hands on me and prayed over me. And I believe in that moment I had a healing. So a way to test that healing was to start weaning myself off my medication. So I didn't do what you did and just cold turkey stop. I went to my GP and I said, I've had a healing. And she said, are you sure you've had a healing? And I said, I'm believing that I've had a healing. I want to just test that. I'm not silly enough. If I am not coping, I'll go straight back on the gear because I love it. But I wouldn't mind testing this healing. And she told me the right way to withdraw the drugs. So I have been withdrawing off my drugs since then, and the reaction to withdrawal is really hard. It's been a slow and horrible process. But I'm now down to the very final stage. I'm down to a quarter of a tablet once a week. And I do that for the next couple of weeks, and then I stop taking it altogether. And I have got huge gratitude around that because I'm just so grateful for the journey, because I think I'm a better person because I've actually experienced anxiety. I'm definitely a better minister because I'm able to have a deep understanding and awareness of how people feel in these moments. And I can, with real lived experience, empathy, sit alongside somebody and really understand it. And I'm grateful to God for that. And I'm grateful that I've actually had the experience, and I'm grateful that it's come to this point, and I'm going to give this a red hot crack. And but like I said, if I need to go back on the gear, I'll go back on the gear, and I'll be telling you all about how great the gear is. Yeah. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful that for everybody that's supporting me on this, because I've told everybody at church.
Yeah.
And and my family at home, everybody's supporting me. So I'm very grateful for all that.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. That pretty much does it for this week. If you want to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram. Search up filthyhope_pod. That's filthyhope_pod on Instagram. Or you can join. We have a private Facebook group where we will be interacting with those group members pretty directly in some really fun and exciting ways. So you can find that on Facebook if you want to throw into the search bar Filthy Hope discussion group.
Come and share your stories with us.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
I want to know.
Yeah, or even just hit us up on Instagram. We're doing some polls and stuff on Instagram, which might feed into some of the content we talk about.
And I promise I won't shove Jesus down anyone's throat.
Absolutely.
No, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
No way.
And Ness mentioned earlier Julie, our counsellor. That's a service that we're offering here at Uniting Heart and Soul. If you want to contribute to help with any of that, just jump onto our website at unitingheartandsoul.org. Is that right?
That's
.org?
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're not a church that asks for your money. If you feel compelled to contribute to our mission, then we are incredibly grateful, and you can do that over on the website. If we offer... Do you want to explain actually a little bit about what Julie's here doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've set up a room called Wellness HQ at Double Bay, which is above one of our churches, because we've got two sites, one at Wallara and one at Double Bay. And a part of being the hands and feet of Jesus into our local community, I had this strong sense that what we needed to do was provide fee help to people that needed counselling, because I think, Jonty, the one thing that I know that kept me out of jail... There's another story, kept me out of jail as a young person, was the fact that I had counselling, and then I had Jesus. And those two things absolutely saved my life. And I'll go more into that story on another podcast and talk about why I didn't go to jail. And so when I became a reverend, I knew that God had placed in my heart the desire for mission into the community in this way, and an extravagant way that our church community can sow in is by doing this. So you know how expensive to go to see a psychologist is. It's super expensive. Our church will do a fee help model with people that are in need, that are really stretched financially. We will help you get the help that you need. And Julie doesn't shove Jesus down your throat, by the way. She's a registered psychologist, and she just does psychology. And this is truly just about helping people become healed. And so that's what we do. And so, yeah, you can definitely find more about Julie on our website. Scroll down, it's called Wellness HQ. And certainly if you feel like you need some counselling and you want our help to do so, please reach out. We'd be more than happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said up the top, we're not professionals. We're just here sharing our stories. So if you do need help, please contact your GP or call Lifeline, or have a look at any of the resources that we have in the show notes and description. That about does us for this week.
Absolutely.
We're looking forward to, at some point later on, I don't want to say when because I don't know what order we're going to be recording these in, but Julie will be joining us to continue this discussion about mental health as we talk about where the bleep is God. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We will see you next week. I'm Jonty.
I'm Ness.
And this is the Filthy Hope Podcast. Have a great week. This podcast is a Uniting Heart and Soul production.